Welcome to Advanced Nurses. We connect with nurses who inspire other nurses by sharing their experiences. And so we're able to bring that information to you.
This is part one of a two-part discussion on the topic of toxic workplaces and layoffs within healthcare with guest Monda Mwaya, adjunct professor/lecturer in Chichewa at the University of Pennsylvania with over 15 years of experience working in healthcare.
It's going to have a conversation about like the realities of the layoffs and how layoffs have impacted the healthcare industry. So there's been a lot more chatter, I would say, in print or in the media. So like your news, you hear your stories. If you're, search online, you hear many stories of individuals who are working in the tech sector who have been impacted by layoffs. And then, of course, we see some other industries like recently, a Pepsi plant in Chicago had closed their plant. So literally everyone there, I'm sure maybe some folks there may have been able to retain employment. But from my understanding, they closed that plant. So there are that whole entire staff there for the most part, they are without work. And I think they're going to be paid out, if I'm not mistaken, like six months severance. There's like an option for that. But the truth is that every single industry has been impacted by this trend around mass layoffs. And so today we're going to have a very deep, insightful conversation about what it looks like to work in a workplace that has gone through these layoffs and what that looks like. And also to answer the question, have workplaces become more toxic because of these mass layoffs? So if you don't mind, would you just give me just a brief background about like your experience in healthcare? I know you work in the managed care space, so for the most part, you work in a client-facing role. So yeah, please, if you don't mind.
Hi, thank you for having me. First of all, yes, I've been in healthcare for 15 years. And you're right, there's been massive layoffs. When I went into healthcare, I had believed the myth that my job would be safe. I think you've heard this before, where you're like, okay, there are certain industries where you always feel secure in your job. And most of my work in healthcare has been some type of supportive work towards nurses or physicians. But there's one peculiar trend that I'm seeing, and I think this is what is part of the problem in creating a toxic work culture, because companies are laying off people. The workforce is not the same. They're trimming roles, but what they're doing is, instead of hiring more people who are who can make the company adequately staffed, they're making people work more under extreme unfair conditions. I've worked with nurses, I've worked with behavioral health therapists who have the same complaint, that the amount of patients that they have to service, and the time, it just doesn't add up. I've met people who are working in the nursing industry who were misled about what their job expectations were, and then they come on the job and they find out that there were some other aspects of the job that was not covered during their interview. I myself have seen that. I think the companies are so worried about performance expectations that they're going ahead and also being overly micromanagers. Some people are being asked to be overproductive, which to me doesn't qualify that you're going to get quality work. And I think in wherever you look, there are mistakes happening. There are mistakes happening because people are overworked. There are mistakes happening because people are understaffed. And it's funny because I have had people who I've known my whole life who enjoyed being a nurse, and they come to me, they're like, I don't know if I want to be a nurse anymore. And that to me is worrisome. Like, what's going on? What are we doing? What are we creating that is so toxic that people are looking back and thinking, I made a wrong career choice, yet they have worked in this career for like 10 to 15 years. That's not okay. I hope that answers your question.
It definitely does. You actually said something that stood out. Well, you said a lot of great things, but one of the things that stood out that you said was about the productivity. In most companies, the way they really make profit, or they're able to be sustainable companies, is really about that growth. So for the most part, most companies are growing as far as their outreach and the markets they want to expand into. They're growing, and there's a goal to grow. But again, with layoffs, what you're doing is you're essentially creating a situation where you have a smaller, leaner team but you're still committed to growth, right? So if you think about that, let's say if you are only in like 3 or 4 states, right, and you want to expand, and let's say states where you're saying, you're looking through your data, and your data is letting you know that there are some areas geographically where you can have greater impact, or your services are needed. You see all the, and these are from, these are your stakeholders that can make those kind of decisions, right? And so, you see companies and programs and departments being reshaped to meet those needs. And it looks like, having, more outreach marketing wise. It looks like having people with more diversified skill set, because now you need individuals who are eager to kind of go out and engage, because now your direction is growth, right? So if it's growth, you're talking about a new market.
And to piggyback on that, patient engagement, it is what healthcare is about, right? Patient engagement. But we have to look at the quality of patient engagement. You can easily convince me to come to your primary care and take you on as a provider, or, to be my physician, but are you giving me quality care? And that's where they're going wrong. I keep seeing this over and over again. Like, they become overwhelmed. I'm not going to talk about, I worked for a big insurance company for a long time. And what they did was they overreached. I was working with the elderly population in New York. And because they are so worried about numbers and engagement, they cut off necessary processes, which was giving customer satisfaction. For example, how do you expect an 80-year-old person to be ordering their over-the-counter benefits online? If you are 80 and you're computer savvy, hey, kudos to you. I don't often see that, and I've been working with the aged population for a long time, and this is why this business of doing Medicare Advantage is not working for this company, because most of the customer base, which they had a lot of, because they had gotten a New York contract, and a lot of them have left dissatisfied because they do not want to talk to a computer. They want to talk to a human being. Do you understand? They want
this is a good point you're making, because that also speaks, and I'll just squeeze this in real quick, that also speaks to the integration of technology to meet both needs. One, in response to the huge mass layoffs and those empty seats that need to kind of be filled, right? So you still need those duties or those functions to be performed. You just don't have the bodies doing it. So you replace it with technology. And then you also have the other issue with just integration of technology and how that looks like over time. So like to what you're saying, their companies are leaning towards bringing in that technology, and they want that reach. They're looking at the cost savings of, if we have a computer outreaching and making phone calls, or being the
point of
doing the
contact
customer
for
service.
ordering. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, doing the customer service piece, then of course, like, okay, there's some savings there, but not really thinking about the fact that human beings, for the most part, want to talk and interact with other human beings.
Exactly.
But as you were saying, please continue. Sorry.
So to me, that's worrisome, because what happens is, I'm just using this from my own perspective, right? Mm-hmm. If I get frustrated and there's not enough customer service, I'm going to leave and go elsewhere. And that's what's been happening. That is what has been happening, because most of these people might have been happy with a certain insurance company, but then they're looking and thinking, hey, you brought me on, you told me I was going to get $300 every 3 months for over-the-counter benefits, but I can hardly put in an order, online. What benefit am I getting? You're selling a lie, And this is why this is failing, because all these companies are so ready and in a rush to make money that they don't do enough research, okay? I'm going to give another example. I was working elsewhere. It's supposed to be managed care, primary care place. And a lot of the individual, needed help with their behavioral health. And they were just focused on their primary care. No, behavior and primary care need to be integrated health. Treat the whole person. If someone is going through depression, they are not going to go to their primary care doctor for their follow-up appointment. If someone is struggling with addiction issues, get those addiction issues under control. You can't expect them to be able to manage their diabetes and other things when their addiction is at the core of what their passion is. So companies need to redirect and go back to the drawing board and see, how do we get patients through the door and how do we really get them well? Not about, how much money can we make off this individual till the next person? That is not okay. It has become a process where there is not something substantial that the patient gets, from wherever they're going for providers. And, it's becoming scary. Something needs to be done.
The thing about it is, what you said was really important when you said doing the research and going back to the drawing board, because essentially what you're saying is, if you are going to go ahead and do these mass layoffs, right, and you're exploring this as a cost-saving measure, you're saying, well, why do you have to cover all of this health insurance and all these benefits? Hey, let's just integrate technology and see what's going on. Mm-hmm. I think that you do need to sit back and see what's going on. Is this a real benefit? Is the risk, and do that risk benefit analysis? Is the risk that we're going to take? Are we having some good risks coming out of this? Are we having, we took a shot, we integrated this technology and something good came out of it? Or are we having bad risks, the bad outcomes, right? So they're coming out of those risks that we've taken and we're looking at a fall in quality of care. Our goal was to save money in one area, but we're spending money in another area, right? So now we have a revolving door of individuals with unmet psychological and behavior health, emotional health, right? Substance abuse issues. And we're looking at that as not being the driver. And it's like, no, that's actually in the driver's seat.
Thank you.
That's what's actually in the driver's seat, because, and it's interesting because in healthcare, oftentimes we talk about social determinants of health. I've read.
And that's my expertise, actually. It's social determinants of health. Yeah.
Cool. And like I've seen in some articles, that instead of using the D, social determinants of health, they use the word driver, right? And for me, I find that is really important, because I think that oftentimes when we think about SDOH needs, we forget that D part, right? So the determinants of health, yes, it's determining where, what success what interventions or which interventions are going to be more successful for you. However, when you think about the driver, right, you think about those things that are more like the motivations, right? So some individuals, it's a matter of transportation. If they don't have their own transportation, that
They're
actually
not
has a
going to
huge
come to
impact on the outcome of their
appointments.
care.
Right.
Mhm.
Right
Yes.
now, I'm working for a company that does specialized care for chronically ill individuals. And that is my job. My job is every single customer I talk to, I do a social determinant of health assessment, because this way, then you're able to treat the whole person, and I like it because it's a new startup, and they have the right ideas, This company, before they hired me, the onboarding experience, just the training was one of the most thorough trainings I've ever had. They really took time instead of just, let her come in and save, so that we can get as many people as possible. They wanted to make sure that they were putting me out there qualified, able to understand what my job role is. I've gone to companies where they wanted me to go right away into the market when I haven't been trained for a month. What am I going to talk about your company? I don't know anything. Meanwhile, the company I'm working for now, I can tell you, because of them being so thorough and I guess sticking to the old adage of what healthcare means, that's why I think they have the success that they have right now. They keep growing. They're not laying off people. They keep growing.
Well, see, this, to me, I feel like from what I know about that company and things that you shared with me as well, is as I was starting to say prior, is these are companies that have also figured out, like, instead of having the big dumb building that you have to fill, so now you have to tell people that they have to return back to the office, right? Because now you have this, because of the time that they came in, they avoided some of this like baggage that a lot of these companies are dealing with. Because some of these companies that have told people to return back to the office, they're actually dealing with the baggage of obligations they have to investors.
Right.
When people are working remotely from home during the pandemic, most companies know that they were more productive. But
we
at the
are more
same time, if you
productive. Yeah,
right,
I've only worked from home.
what I'm saying is, if you have an investor that invested into the real estate, right, and you have a contractual agreement with that company because of the building that you guys that the business is housed in, then what are you going to do? You're going to tell at least 50% of your staff to rotate in there somewhere somehow, because that is a part of your contractual agreement. So therefore, even though it may not necessarily be good for the company because people are leaving, I've seen that in a lot of companies, particularly in health insurance companies, where they have these elaborate managed care organizations and systems and programs, and they were doing fine during the pandemic with people working remotely. And then when they told individuals to come back, I felt like it was like a twofold thing. I felt like it was a way of them getting, I use the term shaking a tree. Like they wanted people to up and leave. And then there was another thing where I felt like for some of these companies, I found that their CEOs were very expressive about, working with whoever was going to be returning to the office to have more of a hybrid kind of role now, because of the fact that the truth is that these companies, outside of the contractual agreement that they have to have their business housed in these, these addresses, these buildings, they probably wouldn't care to have that. But your company coming in when they started and, coming into the healthcare system, adding their services to the processes that we know as the quote unquote US healthcare system. When they're coming into this space, already knowing that they don't need to, navigate that, because they're like, we're not even going to bother with the buildings. We're going to have our teams for the most part working from home. We're going to start off there. So we don't even have to worry about this this real estate issue, because that's another problem with this whole return to work stuff. And I want us to talk about that too, because the thing I want us to slide over into is about the toxicity in workplaces. So before we go there, I did want to just highlight in this article that we see here that there has been layoffs in healthcare, up to 287% in the first 5 months of 2023. And so we're not even including 2024. This is just going back to 2023. And the truth is, a lot of these layoffs were really, I think, for many of us who work in healthcare, who we thought we were going into an industry that had this stability, we were met with companies that either were slow at hiring, many rounds of interviews, ghost jobs being posted on LinkedIn, Indeed, and all these other job posting boards. And the truth is, a lot of it was because there were hiring freezes, and there are companies that may want to look like they're growing by having all these jobs posted. But when you actually go into the interview process, you find out that these are not truly real roles. In many cases, they're just kind of collecting information about these individuals, the applicants, and trying to gauge the kind of salaries that they should be targeting, the individuals that they should be targeting, maybe looking at ways that they can redesign or restructure the role and duties just by having conversations with the applicants. But truly, the end goal of getting a job is less and less of a reality. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's less and less of a reality, because a lot of these companies are quietly still doing this leaner, meaner teams process. And so I want to talk about the toxicity piece, because this is going to be a two-part conversation. So the first part of this conversation, I want to really talk about the toxicity piece. We touched on some of that toxicity already, just in us initiating this conversation around layoffs and the failures in managed care. But some of the things I really want to talk about is like kind of the lowering morale, toxic behaviors, the poor communication, quiet firing, as I mentioned kind of early with the layoffs, and looking at how
quitting too. People are also quietly quitting because
true.
of the toxic work
absenteeism.
environment.
Yeah, so let's start first, if you don't mind, talking about like just lowering morale and the toxic behaviors. If we could just touch on those two topics at first here.
Well, I think managers, I have worked as a supervisor. I have worked as a regular employee. And one of the things I learned in leadership is that you should always have an open door policy with your team, because the team does not exist if you run things from this is what I say and this is what you do. It should be more like a King Arthur round table leadership, you know. I've experienced that. I experienced the toxic work environment after I left the insurance industry, and I went to work for a nonprofit practice place. And one of the things that I saw, and I was kind of horrified, which made me realize that there's a difference between corporate and small places, because there was no HR process, because that would never happen in corporate America, you know. A supervisor would not talk down on you in front of other colleagues. That's a disrespectful, you know. They would either ask you to meet one-on-one on Teams and say whatever it is that you needed to go on your one-on-one, not group setting. And because what happens is that creates an environment where you're asking people to attack each other, you know? And you know, human beings, someone might not like the individual you're admonishing. Someone might jump in with their more negative comment. What environment are you creating? That is a toxic work environment. But that's a problem, because you're just hiring people who are not well trained, you know, and putting them in positions because they promise you that they'll bring you numbers. But at what cost? At the cost of people quietly quitting, or you firing people every 3 months? That's not conducive. What do you think? You tell me.
So for me, I feel like the question I tend to ask is, after all of these layoffs, who are the people who tend to stay in the roles? So, for example, you may have individuals who may be a part of the decision making as far as letting people go. So, therefore, these may be your more cunning, more self-serving individuals where they may see a benefit for themselves.
Oh yeah,
and so
and I've done that, and I did that.
Right.
That's why I took that job. What I was just mentioning to you,
Mhm.
even though I knew it was toxic, I was like, oh, maybe I can just pull it along till because at the time I was trying to get into a PhD program, but I changed my mind after I got accepted into several schools. But you know what? Was I giving quality work? No. Okay.
Right. And so
because I was not present. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Of course. See, what happens also is the individuals who choose to stay or hired often in these
have other
companies,
obligations that make them stay, but it's not to the job.
And usually it's not.
Understand that.
Right, because they're usually not there for the best reason. So again, you may have individuals who get hired after layoffs who are now being asked that although maybe a year or two prior, their credentials and their degree and education pay them a certain amount of money, now they're being asked to do that same role, same responsibilities, and they're asked to do it at like lower, right? Because the state of the job market now, some companies are doing as much as, I'm talking about, I'll just give an example. You can have as high as $120,000, $150,000 salary role that was like common for or typical or expected within a particular role, that now they're offering somewhere 80, 90 for the same exact responsibilities. And they're just taking advantage of the fact that it's an employer's job market. So therefore, you have that issue. The other issue you have is if you have individuals who are still at the company, like I mentioned before, you could have those more self-serving individuals who were the ones that kind of pointing out who can or should be let go. And they were a part of that decision making. So they're there, and a lot of them are there, even though they did let individuals go, they have then taken on more responsibilities, right? And so maybe they've created a situation, and I've been a part of this myself directly, where they start to develop streamlined processes to cut you out of the equation. So they have a little buffer time so they can kind of get used to those responsibilities, which is perfectly fine from a business perspective. But also what I see happen is those individuals who stay, they are more resentful. So now what you were saying about quality of work, even if you are hired after layoffs, mass layoffs in a particular company, or if you are one of those that survived the layoffs and you're still there, I find absenteeism is what you were describing is to be a very common issue where people are showing up to work, but they don't give their best.
They're not doing their work. Thank you.
They're cutting corners, right? They're finding ways. And I want to also say this for the record, and I think it's important for us to highlight this. Individuals who work on site primarily, do not get me wrong, I'm not saying people who work remotely are completely above this, but I find that people who work on site, especially post-pandemic, I find that those individuals have the most absenteeism, in my personal opinion, because I find that if you're working remote, there's an expectation around productivity.
Oh yes, when I step away from my computer for a few minutes, I get nervous.
It goes idle.
Yeah, because I'm like, and yet it has never happened. It's just something that you are so trained from working remote, because I've been working remote for 7 years now.
Right.
And I mean, it was before the pandemic, and that's how I was trained, was to do my job. I don't have water cooler moments, okay? I don't go to my coworker and chit chat about what they did last weekend, because there's no time. So therefore, things get done. Do you understand what I mean? But when I worked in the office,
there you go. Versus when you work in the office,
side conversations.
There you go. And with those side conversations, you also have, because studies, not my personal opinion, studies have already proven that for most roles that we see, most adult college educated professionals, even if you don't, not college educated, but professional roles, that 8-hour workday really can be done within 4 hours. So what happens is a lot of times where the productivity increase that you've seen during the pandemic really happens is because those other 4 hours where, let's say, people would be having their lunch break or chit-chatting with someone or adjusting after traveling into the office or whatever it is, or as people wind down as the day goes to the later part of the day, all of that, you don't have that. So it's like you literally log on at 8, 7, whatever you log on, and whenever you're done, 3, 4, 5 o'clock, you're like working within that time frame. And all of this is work that is trackable, traceable work. So unless you have a job where you have to be, let's say, in a call center kind of structure where you really have to be like on that phone from the time, they can see you when you're available. Then outside of that, for the most part, people who work remote, while they're still working their full day, they may have maybe some little flexibility because there's some things you can kind of attend to now because you have that flexibility. But I find that people who work remote still are going to be putting in more work than those individuals who are face-to-face. And I'm only saying that because I find that in those kind of work styles and workplaces and roles, the mindset is of that kind of, I like to use pre-pandemic, although there were companies that were already transitioning into remote work, but it's kind of like that mindset of, well, we have to have time for our socializing. We have to have time for ice cream day. We have to have time for spirit day.
But you do that. The company I work for has a happy hour every Friday. And it's optional. Oh yes.
You can do that if you're forward thinking, but if your company, and this is, I want to say this, and I hope I land when I say this. If a company chooses to do, like you said, research, really some real R&D, really look at what's in front of them, if they choose to do that, they can implement the right types of activities and interactions and systems that can make them hit all the checkpoints. So you can have people socializing, you can have the interaction, the activity, the engagement, all of that, even though your teams are remote. Or you can have the integration of technology and people advancing the understanding of how to integrate technology, even if they're patient-facing, client-facing, or on site, because that's what is lost also. Oftentimes when you are working on site versus remote, and I hate to be on this tangent here, but I just wanted to squeeze this in here, is that I find that people who have an older mindset, and when I say older, I'm not referring to age, I'm referring to that mindset of kind of like, oh, I just can't, technology is like a bridge that I can't cross. You find that a lot of times when it comes on to communication, reporting, the integration of technology, advancing their knowledge base around the integration of technology, they struggle because they are very much depending on that face-to-face touch and that face-to-face encounter, and that they're depending on it. And so therefore, there's a lot of limitations that come with that. We know that if you have something that you're deploying electronically, there is a way to present that information, and there's also a way for that information to be more readily accessible. And it should be, right? That's the reason why people integrate technology. But if you are of a different mindset, and especially if you're in a leadership role, and especially if you're running a lean team, and especially if you have been brought on to be a source, and that's just like my little theory around people who are zebra and horses. So your role now is a hybrid role, because your role is a combination of previous positions that have now been let go out of the company. So now you become a Zorse, right? You are the zebra horse, and you now have to lead a team, and you don't even know how you're supposed to show up, right? So you have individuals that have a compounding, issues around how they present, how they lead, how they integrate technology, because they're coming from a mindset, and they're coming from a place where those were not skills that they actually needed because they weren't expecting it. right?
No, and
Because
they
that's
did
what
not
happened with a lot of
learn.
people
They
even
did
at the
not learn how
pandemic.
to manage a remote team. Case in point,
Right.
not that I want to be tooting.
Yeah,
I know
please.
I'm I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but again, I just want to tell you something. This company I'm working for, I have two different supervisors because I do social determinants of work, right? Of health. One is my social worker, is a social worker, and the other one is a nurse care manager. And she's like the main boss. But what I found interesting on our one-on-one, she said to me one of our meetings, "Hey, I don't want to give you too many meetings with me. Would it be better if I and the social worker manager both meet with you at once?" Those are ways you're making processes work. Workplace, not wasting my time meeting you in different Zooms and trying to figure out what is it you need from me when we can collaborate together. Because yes, I work with the social work side, I work with the healthcare. Mixing them together and having a meeting together is like the most conducive thing you can do, right? So it just depends what workforce you're hiring. Do they have experience managing a remote team? Have they worked remotely before? Have they worked in that particular role? You know what I'm saying?
And do they have the right combination? Do they have the right combination of skills? Because like I said about the zebra horse, there's nothing particularly wrong with you combining roles if you feel that there is, you want to have, you have a unicorn kind of expectation that you like, I need this special person in this role, which is one of the reasons why I always tell nurses to diversify their skill sets. Like understand what other industries do, understand what social workers do, understand what engineers do, understand what the folks in finance do, understand the business, operations, like understand their different perspectives so you can be more impactful in your role.
We want to hear from you. Schedule a free consultation or send us an email at advancednurses@acd4n.com or visit our websites www.advancednurses.info or www.acd4n.com.